Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
In 1965, I was in the 6th grade in St. John's Primary School, Agbor, Nigeria. In January 1966, I enrolled in St. George's Grammar School, Obinomba, Nigeria. 15 months later, I fled from Obinomba, Nigeria, to Onitsha, Biafra. My Igbo-speaking family fled from Nigeria to Biafra, and we fled because thousands of Igbos from southeastern Nigeria were being killed in northern Nigeria. That organized killings of Igbos occurred from May 29, 1966 through September 29, 1966. That civil uprising preceded the war between Nigeria and Biafra. That war began on July 6, 1967 and ended on January 15, 1970. 1 in 15 Biafrans died during that 30-month-long war. In the list of the worst genocidal crimes of the 20th century that was committed against humanity, the death of 1 in 15 Biafrans was ranked 5th. In the evening of March 21, 1968, the day my hometown of Onitsha was captured by Nigerian soldiers, we fled on foot and fled from 14 Mba Road, Onitsha, Biafra, to Merchants of Light School, Oba, Biafra. Tens of thousands of refugees that fled from Onitsha were camped at Merchants of Light School, Oba, Biafra. At about 6 o'clock of the following morning of March 22, 1968, we were alerted by fleeing refugees that advancing Nigerian soldiers had captured Onitsha and might capture our refugee camp at Oba, and do so within a few hours. Scared, we continued our flight to Nnewi and Nnobi and stopped our flight when we reached a refugee camp that was a former school classroom that was across the street from the Catholic Church in Oketiti, Biafra. About 5 days after the war was over, or on about January 20, 1970, we returned as refugees and squatted for 5 months in an abandoned house that was along Port Harcourt Road in the Fege quarters of Onitsha. In mid-1970, I began to teach myself physics, algebra, geometry, and calculus. About 2 weeks after I received a scholarship letter from Oregon, United States, that was dated September 10, 1973, I was in Lagos, Nigeria, to apply for an international travel passport. Back in 1973, the Nigerian passport or its application forms cannot be received by mail. At that time, the Nigerian Passport Office in Kakawa Street, Lagos, Nigeria, had a reputation as a cesspool of corruption all persons applying for the Nigerian passport spent months coming to the passport office and did so to monitor the progress of their applications. Nigerian travel passports were deliberately withheld by the chief passport officer in Lagos. Back in 1973, my travel passport was withheld until shortly after Christmas Day. My passport was withheld until I paid a bribe of £5 to one of the passport touts. I had expected to be in the United States as early as June 1973 at age 18. I had applied for admission into American schools, and I applied shortly after I had passed the entrance examination to the University of London that I took as an external candidate back in January 1973 in Onitsha, East Central State, Nigeria. My Nigerian travel passport was issued in late December 1973 and after a 6-month delay. I arrived in the United States on Sunday, March 24, 1974, and after a 9-month delay, and after paying a bribe of £5 to a passport tout who claimed that the chief passport officer gets a large commission from that bribe. That £5 was a month's wage. My Nigerian travel passport was also withheld until I paid a presumably round-trip airfare from Lagos, Nigeria to Portland, Oregon, United States. That two-way airfare was in addition to my one-way airfare to Portland, Oregon, United States. That two-way airfare was called, quote-unquote, repatriation fee. But it was an extortion fee. I paid for a round-trip ticket, but I was never given any ticket. I paid £150 or 30 months' salary as the advance repatriation fee. I paid the chief passport officer in Lagos 2.5 years' salary for the privilege of leaving Nigeria to study in the United States. As a result of that exorbitant extortion from the chief passport officer, I arrived in the United States with only $134, or much less than the bribe that I paid the corrupt chief passport officer of Nigeria. I believe that my repatriation fee went into the personal bank account of the chief passport officer in Lagos, Nigeria. My first night outside Nigeria was spent in room 36 of Butler Hall, Monmouth, Oregon, United States. I checked into Butler Hall at about 6 in the evening of Sunday, March 24, 1974. 3 months later, on June 20, 1974, I began programming the CDC 3300. That was the first supercomputer to be rated at 1 million instructions per second. That supercomputer was marketed 7 years earlier as the world's fastest computer. By far, the most important contribution to the field of supercomputing is to attain a speed that was once impossible, and then to harness that new speed to solve the grand challenge problems arising in science and engineering. Such a breakthrough in computational mathematics or the supercomputer solution of a grand challenge problem is particularly worthy of being a benchmark in the history of the computer. That breakthrough is noteworthy if it changed the way we looked at the computer and the internet. With the supercomputer that communicates across processors and does so synchronously, and computes within processors and does so simultaneously, we now have answers to previously unanswerable grand challenge questions. But back in 1974, my unanswerable question was how to solve a large system of equations of algebra and how to solve them across a new global network of 64 binary thousand processors that defined and outlined a new internet. On June 20, 1974, the day I began programming supercomputers, the number of computer scientists in the world were few. That should not come as a surprise. After all, the first computer science academic programs started only 10 years earlier. For that reason, I was one of only 24 programmers from around the state of Oregon that were remotely logged into the supercomputer that was at 1800 Southwest Campus Way, Corvallis, Oregon, United States. 3 months before I started programming supercomputers, I had arrived from Onitsha, Nigeria. It seemed like I was catapulted from a slingshot from Onitsha to Oregon. At that time, my family in Nigeria were still struggling to pronounce the word Oregon. The slingshot that catapulted me to Oregon was a scholarship letter that was dated September 10, 1973. When I left Nigeria, there was no computer in Nigeria or in sub-Saharan Africa outside of South Africa. Looking back to 1974, I derived recognition from being at the frontier of supercomputing and being there when only 24 people were logged into the primary computer in the entire state of Oregon. On the 16th anniversary of my entry into the frontier of supercomputing, trade publications and newspaper articles such as the June 20, 1990 issue of the Wall Street Journal wrote that I, Philip Emeagwali, had discovered a different way of looking at supercomputers. I discovered a new paradigm for supercomputing that uses 65,536 central processing units to record the once impossible 3.1 billion calculations per second. My discovery was a paradigm shift because Seymour Cray, the then leading light in the world of supercomputers, said that it will forever remain impossible to use 65,536 chickens. That was his metaphor for the as many slowest central processing units, and use them to defeat one strong ox. That was his metaphor for the fastest vector supercomputers. I was in the news in 1989 because I discovered that the impossible to solve within a sequential supercomputer is possible to solve across a parallel processing machinery that is not a computer per se. That new machinery is a virtual supercomputer and is a new internet de facto. That new internet is a new global network of 65,536 central processing units. At a visceral level, I felt like a 19-year-old that sojourned from the heart of my ancestral Igbo land and across the Atlantic Ocean, beyond North America and beyond the North Pole, and sojourned to reach the 21st century's land of the spirits, or Alamwo, namely the unexplored territory of the never-before-seen computer and the new internet. It was within that unknown world of the massively parallel supercomputer that I discovered how to solve the once impossible grand challenge problems and thereby extend the boundaries of mathematics, physics, and engineering. I made the impossible to solve possible to solve. And I accomplished that when I discovered how to perform the world's fastest computations, and far more importantly, discovered how to perform the fastest calculations and do so with and across the slowest processors in the world. In 1989, it made the news headlines that a lone wolf Nigerian supercomputer wizard in the United States had discovered how to build the fastest supercomputer and discovered how to always compute fastest. I am that Nigerian supercomputer scientist that was in the news back in 1989 and in the news for discovering practical parallel supercomputing. I was in the news because I was unconventional and saw something previously unseen, namely a new way of supercomputing. In the old way of supercomputing, a supercomputer that did only one thing at a time was used to solve the toughest problems that arose in mathematics, science, and engineering. In my new way of supercomputing, I used the slowest processors that each merely executed 47,303 calculations per second per processor. I am that lone wolf supercomputer scientist that was in the news for discovering how to perform the fastest calculations and how to do so across a new internet that is a new global network of 65,536 inexpensive, tightly coupled commodity off-the-shelf processors that shared nothing between each other. What is the contribution of Philip Emeagwali to the development of the computer? I discovered how to always perform the world's fastest computations and perform it with the world's slowest processors. I was in the news in 1989 because my experimental discovery of practical parallel supercomputing marked a milestone in the history of the computer. For me, Philip Emeagwali, my experimental discovery of 1989 of practical parallel supercomputing wasn't unexpected. I expected to confirm my earlier theoretical discovery of how to massively parallel process across a new internet that will become a virtual supercomputer. I expected to confirm that I could communicate across and compute on 65,536 computational fluid dynamics codes and communicate and compute them at once. As a theory, my theoretical discovery of parallel supercomputing was ridiculed as a huge waste of everybody's time. Yet, I discovered how to save everybody time and how to do so by synchronously communicating and simultaneously computing in only one day what used to take 65,536 days or 180 years. The contribution of Philip Emeagwali to the development of the computer is this. I experimentally discovered how to parallel process across a new internet that is a new global network of 65,536 central processing units. After my discovery, a grand challenge problem that formerly took 65,536 days or 180 years of time to solution on one central processing unit now takes only 1 day of time to solution across a new internet. Metaphorically speaking, that was how I discovered 180 years in 1 day. Back in 1989, the award committee of the Computer Society was not aware that I was black and African, and for that reason, gave me credit for discovering practical parallel supercomputing, and did so without taking race into consideration. But scientists that knew that I was black and African were terribly upset that the Computer Society gave me the top award in the field of supercomputing and gave it to me without digging deeper to discover that I was black and African. In that respect, the IEEE Computer Society did not give the top supercomputer award to a black supercomputer scientist. I simply kept the credits for my contributions, and I could keep them because I was the sole inventor of practical parallel supercomputing and the sole expert on the new supercomputer that parallel processed across my ensemble of 64 binary thousand processors. Parallel processing appeared as science fiction on February 1, 1922, and as 64,000 human computers working together and in parallel and doing so to forecast the weather. The precondition to forecasting the weather is that those 64,000 human computers must solve the initial boundary value grand challenge problem of calculus that is governed by the primitive equations of meteorology. For 36 years after 1922, interest in parallel processing was lost in part because the automatic programmable computer that provided the motivation for faster computing did not exist and was not invented until 1946. Parallel processing started appearing in computer science literature and appeared regularly onwards of 1958. For the 31 years onward of 1958, parallel processing was mocked at computer science conferences, and the supercomputer technology was ridiculed as a beautiful theory that lacked an experimental confirmation. As a research supercomputer scientist, my goal is to discover how to compute fastest and do so with the slowest processors, or how to do more with less, and how to create reality from science fiction. Parallel processing, the technology that enables the supercomputer to solve many problems at once, enabled me to solve 65,536 problems at once. In principle, your computer can do whatever my supercomputer can do. However, your computer that is powered by only one isolated processor takes 30,000 years to solve a grand challenge problem that my supercomputer that is powered by an ensemble of over 10 million processors takes only 1 day to solve. Practical parallel supercomputing must be investigated on a broad canvas and imagined in broad imaginative strokes. Practical parallel supercomputing only benefits humankind if and only if it is proven to solve the grand challenge problems. Practical parallel supercomputing is not for the faint of heart or for those locked within their own intellectual silos. As a research supercomputer scientist, my goal was not to merely invent new algebra and new calculus. My research goal was to project my new mathematics and project that new knowledge from the blackboard to the motherboard and across a new internet that is a new global network of 64 binary thousand processors, and most importantly, to project that new supercomputer into the real world where it helps my country of birth, Nigeria, discover and recover otherwise elusive crude oil and natural gas, or where it impacts the market trader in my ancestral hometown of Onitsha. The fastest supercomputer attracts the toughest mathematical problems in physics in the manner a high mountain attracts the storms. The supercomputer is to mathematics what the Nile is to Egypt. Each is a lifeline. The supercomputer is an intellectual extension of the complex equations scribbled on the mathematician's blackboard. My goal was to invent a supercomputer out of the slowest processors. Inventing that supercomputer demanded that I become an athlete of the mind. 9 in 10 supercomputer cycles are consumed solving the partial differential equation of calculus and physics. For that reason, practical parallel supercomputing may be defined as solving millions upon millions of initial boundary value problems at once. On the 4th of July 1989, I announced my discovery of practical parallel supercomputing. The response from everybody was that I made a mistake. The first 6 copies of my 1,057-page research report that was dated July 4, 1989, that described how I discovered practical parallel supercomputing were thrown into the dustbin of the reviewers. I was mocked, and I was warned that I was computing with science fiction, not with a new supercomputer. Everybody that said that I made a mistake was mistaken. Practical parallel supercomputing has withstood the test of time and is the vital technology that powers every supercomputer manufactured today. That experimental discovery that occurred on the 4th of July 1989 took the parallel supercomputer from a research and development project to the widespread commercialization that is called the modern computer. Parallel processing validated the modern computer. The amount of new computations that I discovered how to compute on the 4th of July 1989 was 64 binary thousand times what could be computed only one day earlier. After 1989, massively parallel processing became the standard technology that must be used in all supercomputers. Before 1989, the fastest 1,000 supercomputers in the world derived their supercomputing speeds from only one vector processing unit. After 1989, the fastest 1,000 supercomputers in the world derived their supercomputing speeds from up to 10.65 million central processing units that counterintuitively computed 10.65 million things at once instead of intuitively computing only one thing at a time. My 1989 paradigm shift from computing only one thing at a time to computing 65,536 things at once opened the door to computing 10.65 million things at once. A future world without the parallel supercomputer could be a world without the computer of the future. If parallel supercomputing is subtracted from human knowledge, nearly every computer, all supercomputers, and the internet itself will shut down. Parallel supercomputing is not a new knowledge that was created. Parallel supercomputing exists theoretically and a priori, and existed as a technique that was uncovered for computing faster. I discovered practical parallel supercomputing when I parallel processed across my new internet. That was a new global network of 65,536 tightly coupled commodity off-the-shelf processors that shared nothing between each other and that were equal distances apart from each other. I turned science fiction to reality by discovering how to parallel compute and how to do so sight unseen. I was in the news back in 1989 because I was the first person to solve a grand challenge problem and solve it by massively parallel computing it. I achieved that supercomputer breakthrough and did so at a time all my 64 binary thousand processors were expected to forever remain silent. Parallel supercomputing is an invention because computers and supercomputers are now parallel processing. Thank you. I'm Philip Emeagwali. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Insightful and brilliant lecture. Insightful and brilliant lecture.